For the first time since 2010, Utah and BYU will face off in a conference showdown. This rivalry is renewed and has a whole new twist with all of the Big 12 involved. We're breaking down what's at stake for both sides and the future of this rivalry on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If this is your first time listening to the show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by KSL Sports' Alex Napoles. And Alex, it's finally here. We've waited a long time. Utah and BYU back as conference rivals. The Big 12 showdown is this Saturday. I can't wait to have this rivalry back in all its glory.
It feels amazing, JT, to be able to have this game at the conference level again. Obviously, there was a couple years there where the rivalry just, I wouldn't say it meant a little bit less, because obviously it's Utah BYU. It's always going to mean something more to both sides, but now it has even more meaning now that it's back in conference play, right? It is a conference game, and eventually down the line, it could have a lot of implications to a Big 12 championship, maybe, it could have big implications to which team is going to sit at the top of the Big 12. And I think down the line, that's a possibility. But this year, it's a little bit different. It's just going to be the first year back. And regardless, the stakes are going to be high because it is a conference game.
I still can't believe we're sitting here. And if you would have told me coming into the year, one of the teams would be undefeated, one of them would be 500, I'll be like, oh, we know who that is. It'll be Utah with all the returning players and Cam Rising and the story for the season, yada, yada, yada. And no, it's BYU, the Cougars, continuing to find ways to win. It's been a heck of a run for this BYU team so far. They are one of the best teams in college football, and Utah is extremely far from that mantle as they were hoping to be coming into the season. So what's at stake in this rivalry? I believe Utah is trying to prove this week that they are the better football program overall than BYU still. Some of you Cougar fans will listen to that and you will get fired up and say, what are you talking about? We're undefeated. You guys aren't. You are absolutely right. No matter the result of this game, BYU is the better team this year. I would actually compare it to how in 2021, Utah lost to BYU, but at the end of the season, there was no doubt who was better, right? It was a Utah team that ended up going on, winning a conference championship, all the things like that. That Utah team, no one wanted to see them by the time they got to the end of the year, once they found their stride with Cam Rising. This BYU team is better than this Utah team, but what Utah is going for them is anything can happen on a Saturday night in Rice-Eccles Stadium in a rivalry game. And I think Utah's argument for why they'd be the better program overall is, well, look, they've won 9 of the last 10 games. Yes, the last time they played, they did lose. But as I said, if you look over the last few years, Utah's been a better program than BYU. But there's a lot going on with Utah. It's not just the fact that this is a down year. It's everything with Kyle Whittingham. It's the way this team has lost 4 games in a row to middle pack to lesser Big 12 teams. So I think there's a lot on the line here, because I think if Utah wins against BYU, they can say, even in our down year, we are still better than the Cougars. We're still the better program. But BYU can not only say, hey, we beat you, and there's a chance based on just this game on paper does not look like it's going to be close for Utah, right? Like BYU should win in terms of their undefeated record. Utah coming in 4-4 with the offense struggling mightily. If BYU wins this and then goes on to win the conference championship, all that, it's no doubt that BYU is the better program. But I still think Utah can lay claim to that monarch if they get a win, even in a season that has been so disappointing and abysmal. You couldn't even get us when we're this low, I think Utah fans would say. That's why we're still the better program. So I think the bragging rights here are just really high.
Absolutely. And as you know, when you look at this Utah team, obviously things haven't gone to expectation. Far from it. They're sitting with just one conference win. And so when you look at this upcoming game against BYU, I think for Utah, it would be a massive, massive, massive win to get this win against BYU. Not only because I think it has a really big possibility of giving Utah the opportunity to correct their season and look for that bowl eligibility, but of course, it's going to give you the bragging rights over the team down south.
Yeah,
for Utah.
Which are absolutely massive. I mean, bragging rights, just like, I mean, we know about the passion that exists in this rivalry, right? I mean, the fans on both sides, you're either for Utah or you're for BYU. And that's what makes this so exciting. There is a clear line drawn in the sand between the two sides, the passion, the intensity, the fact that it is in your state. It's what we love about this rivalry, and it is going to be so much fun to have it back. And I want to continue to talk about what I talked about earlier, because I still think there are a lot of BYU fans probably listening and saying, look, if we lose to Utah, we're still on this incredible season. Like, we're still the better program. But as I mentioned, 9 of the last 10 games have been won by Utah. And you look at what Utah has accomplished over the last few years, right? The back-to-back Pac-12 championships. Sure, last year, 8-4 was a disappointment in the regular season. And yes, Utah lost their bowl game. But still, overall, Utah was considered better than BYU last season. Then you look at this year. This is the first year where we're this late this is the first time we're this late in the season. I think the only other exception I'd say is 2020, probably, that we're this late in the season and that we consider BYU better than Utah. So that's why I'm saying, if you look at the overall history of the recent history of these teams, you would still say Utah has been the better program. I mean, Utah was a tier 1 college football program, according to EA Sports Top 25. There's some of you probably thinking, why did JT just quote EA Sports Top 25? Well, because the metric that they used to evaluate their tier 1 programs was based on recent success. And once again, what I'm saying is Utah's had a lot more recent success than BYU, but BYU can come in, beat Utah in this game. And honestly, if they win this game too, that's where it's just like, it's a cherry on top for them that they beat Utah. For Utah, it's like, this season sucked, but at least we beat BYU. That's what Utah is trying to say. And once again, Utah can say, even in this abysmal season, we still proved we're better than BYU. And that's why Utah would say, hey, we're still the better in-state program. If you look at our recent success, and even in a down year, we have the bragging rights that we can then go and talk to recruits about too, right? To tell them and say, hey, look, even last year didn't go great. We didn't have our quarterback situation, and we still proved we're better than those guys. And then BYU can walk in if they beat Utah and go, look, you see that other team over there? They didn't make a bowl game, because that's what Utah is also fighting for, right? Trying to make a bowl game. They didn't make a bowl game. Their head coach may be retiring soon, and we absolutely stomped them in their home stadium amidst this historic season. So I just think there are so much at stake when you talk about the current just bragging rights, who's the better team in the state of Utah. And of course, that always impacts recruiting overall. And we're all just, every team wants their program to be on top, and you got to own your rivalry if you want to be on top. Utah and BYU looking to get off to a strong start in the Big 12 in this rivalry. And once again, Alex, this is going to be such a fun week, and I cannot wait for Saturday night.
Absolutely. And not to jump into too much hypotheticals, but there's a very big possibility that BYU obviously makes it to the Big 12 championship game. Now they're sitting alone at the top, right? Mm-hmm. If BYU goes on to win the Big 12 championship, and for Utah fans, if Utah can pull off the win at home against BYU on Saturday, BYU goes on, becomes conference championship. They have the one loss just to this Utah team. Imagine how amazing that would feel for this Utah fan base.
Yep, I can already see the Utah pages on X or whatever being like, we're the Big 12 champs after beating BYU. Which,
there you go.
Which I'm never going to agree with that logic, because look, the rest of the season has to matter still.
And that's what's at stake here. That is the bragging right that they're playing for.
1,000%. And it's going to be really fun to see. Utah, despite all the disappointment, they're going to be fired up for the chance to derail their rival season. And we talk all the time about how many guys from this Utah team are still on the 2021 roster. They're going to be motivated and ready to go. And they've accomplished a lot. That 2021 class this year hasn't gone to plan. But one thing they've never done, beaten BYU. They got a chance to do it on Saturday. So let's talk about how we got here in a moment. I want to break down what's led both these teams, one, to an undefeated record, for Utah's case, a 4-4, 500 record, and then talk about, too, just how the future of this rivalry could be shaped, as well as the recruiting implications potentially. We're going to be breaking all that down in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime, which is why they've created the Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel. The energy shot made just for super fans like us, the fans who are the first in the parking lot and who are the last to leave. We see you. And with 5 Hour Energy, Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot, it gives you exactly what you need to make it through a long tailgate. Speaking of long tailgates, it is an 8:15 p.m. kickoff in Salt Lake City. So that's a long day of tailgating. That's a long day of daily activities, whatever you're going to do to pass the time until we actually arrive at the start of this renewed rivalry. That's where you need 5 Hour Energy to get you through the day. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you're rooting for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're preparing for a big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with 5 Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com, shipping nationwide. All right, Alex, coming back in here, talking about how we landed here. Let's start with Utah. Just a super frustrating season. I think for people who are just parachuting in for this game, or even some of you that maybe checked out after the first loss and you're like, why is Utah still struggling? And those of you who listened last week, you probably know where I'm going to go with this. It's the quarterback situation. It's the number one thing that's continued to derail this team. We actually just got the news last week that Sam Heward also suffered a season-ending injury. So it is Isaac Wilson or Brandon Rose. And that'll be a big storyline all week long we'll have to talk about. Is going to be Isaac Wilson or Brandon Rose. I am so fired up to do another quarterback controversy. No, I'm not, but that's part of the job. So we will definitely have to talk about it on the show this week. But Utah, biggest thing holding Utah back to me has been quarterback play when Cam has not been in there. And even when Cam was in there and hurt, right? There have been plays to be made on the field so often, and Utah hasn't been able to make them. The ground game's been solid. I think it's been more than good enough. Like if the pass game wasn't abysmal, this Utah team would be averaging a lot more than 12 points per game over their last 4 Big 12 contests. So biggest thing for me, like I said, is the quarterback. The interior offensive line hasn't been playing great. I mentioned the tight ends and some of their blocking struggles. The defense has still been really good, but even they've taken a step back. They've had to get a lot of red zone stops and some craziness that has kind of happened that isn't honestly like Utah right now is still a top 20 defense. If they've played like the way they did against better offenses, BYU's, Colorado's, Iowa State, they're going to tumble down. They also need to step up and play better. And of course, yet again, one of the other things that's hampered Utah, the injury bug. You need whoever's out there needs to step up. But the fact that Utah has already missed so many starters against Houston, you didn't have Junior Tafuna and Keanu Tanavasa, your top 2 defensive tackles. Karene Reed's missed a lot of time this season. Connor O'Toole's missed a lot of time this season. Cam Rising really hasn't played at all too. And even Money Parks is now out for the season. So this Utah team has yet again been bit aggressively by the injury bug. You factor in inconsistent play with the injury bug and some obviously issues at coaching. Utah's offensive play calling hasn't always been great, and you land at 500.
That's a perfect summary of how we got here. That is the best way to wrap it up and to keep it short, to keep it right to the point, right? It's been similar issues to what we saw last year, in which you don't have Cam Rising. You're going back and forth on quarterbacks. This year, you have a quarterback in Isaac Wilson, who is obviously still a true freshman and is playing like a true freshman. Mm-hmm. And it's just the inability to move the ball down the field. It's hurting Utah. And that's a perfect recap that you gave, JT, there. What's going on with this team and why we see this team sitting at 4-4.
Yeah. And as I've talked about on the show a little bit too, like people will be like, oh, why are you so critical of Isaac? I've said, look, if you turn on a play and you go, why didn't it work? A lot of the times you landed Isaac Wilson. But what's the problem? Isaac Wilson shouldn't be out there. That's where the Utah quarterback, the lack of quarterback development has extremely hurt Utah. You try to find a veteran late in the transfer portal, you get him hurt. So that's where so much of the coaching issues, and that's where that ultimately falls at Kyle Whittingham's feet. You don't have a strong enough backup quarterback option, and a lot of the other ones you even try to bring in end up getting hurt. I mean, I don't know how Sam Heward got hurt. I mean, you're not even supposed to be hitting the quarterbacks in practice. Obviously, fluke things happen, but that's where it's just the injuries just continue to mount for this team, and it's crazy. So I talked a lot about Utah, Alex. I want to know for you, how did we get here with this crazy Cougars team? I think their over-under on wins was like 4.5 or something. They've skyrocketed past that. They're clearly the best team in the Big 12 right now. How are we sitting here where currently the best team in the state of Utah is the BYU Cougars and not the Utah Utes?
I think you have to go back to that Kansas State game for BYU.
Mm-hmm.
That 6-minute span where they get a couple lucky bounces, big plays on special teams, and they go up on Kansas State within a 6-minute span in that second quarter. Since then, this BYU team has been playing with swagger. They've been playing with confidence. They've been doing everything right. They've been doing things right. There was a lot of questions, even for my part, about BYU and this offense prior to that Kansas State game. Right? Was Retzlaff going to play and be the guy for BYU? Was the defense going to improve? Was the O-line going to improve? And all those questions were quickly, there was still a little bit of concern, right? There was a couple of turnovers, a turnover bug at the beginning of the year for BYU, but they were able to find ways to win. But since that Kansas State game, they've turned a rock. They're just playing with a bunch of confidence, a bunch of swagger. That defense is incredible. Anytime I'm watching that BYU defense, I am taken back. It's amazing how well they're playing on defense at this moment. And that is honestly why we're talking about an 8-0 BYU. Then a couple of just big plays, couple of good quarterback play, good running game. Darius Lasser, Chase Roberts, phenomenal receivers making huge plays for BYU, and a couple just big special teams plays. They're right now, all three phases of this BYU team are playing really good football.
This BYU team is playing really good football, and there's so much credit that has to go to them for continuing to find ways to win. For example, Retzlaff's been fantastic this season. There's only one game he hasn't thrown for over 200 yards. In fact, it was a game he threw under 150 yards, and it was one of the largest margins for victory BYU's had on the entire season. 38-9, they beat 13th ranked Kansas State. Like, your quarterback doesn't give you a great game, and you just find ways to win. That's where I'm so impressed. The special teams plays, the defensive turnovers, and whatever a game seems to require, this BYU team delivers, right? Like, you look at a team like Oklahoma State, there have been just all over the board, but they found some offense. They found some magic. Things were getting crazy in Provo on that Friday night. And it seemed like it was the makings of that just classic college football upset where you have a team that looks like a conference contender and they lose to a team they have no business losing to. And what did they do? Late plays were made. Keely by Retzlaff. He's been absolutely fantastic. As of you mentioned, some of the guys, Laster, Roberts. How about on the defensive side? Taggart, Glasgow, another one I'm looking at too. I'm so impressed by this team. And just also, once again, not to have a letdown. This is at the point in the college football season. We have the college football ranking show coming up on Tuesday. We're comparing resumes and all these things. And this person has this ranked win and this and that and yada, yada, yada. What BYU has is no losses. And I don't care that they haven't beaten a Tennessee or an SEC team. That's impressive. Now, I will also say, because this is Locked On Utes, right? The fact that they've been close to losing those games shows why this is not an invincible team. I don't believe there's a dominant college football team this year. Even Oregon, they've been good as of late. We saw they started the season. They nearly lost Idaho. I do not think there is an undefeated college football team out there right now. I think BYU is a really good team. Right now, they are one of the 10 best teams in college football. But I've said this last week. They look to me more like a team of destiny than a dominant football team. And dominant, I mean like all-time dominant, because they've been really good and dominant in terms of their win-loss results week in and week out. But a team of destiny, so often we see those Disney fairy tales don't actually come to fruition. And that, to me, when you look at why BYU has been in close games against some of these teams, I mean, UCF was a favor on the road, right? BYU won that game. Why was UCF a favor? Because BYU's had some holes. They find ways to win, give them credit. This is not an invincible Cougars squad, and there's absolutely a path to victory for Utah.
Absolutely. And I mean, even head coach Kalani Sitake says it you listen to his availabilities, you listen to his comments after games, and he says, look, we're playing well, but there's still mistakes that I want to clean up. There's still mistakes that we need to fix. Mm-hmm. I think defensively, while they are playing really good football, there have been a couple of defensive plays where guys are trying to do too much to make a big play. Obviously, this BYU team has been very good at forcing turnovers. However, sometimes they're trying to force the turnover. And what I mean by that is they're trying to do too much to make the big play, that in turn they end up letting the other team make the big play. We saw it a couple times with Ollie Gordon in that game against Oklahoma State, right? People wanted to take down Ollie Gordon in the backfield, and Ollie Gordon is escaping, and he ends up making a big run. And again, I think that just comes down to guys wanting to, trying too hard to make the big play, and that's part of the mistakes that Kalani Sitake talks about. So yes, this is a team that, while they are playing really good football, there are some mistakes that I think Utah can capitalize on.
There are a lot of things that Utah could potentially capitalize, and BYU's looking at things like, hey, if we execute on defense, there's no way their offense should move the ball. This is a top 50 ranked BYU defense, and Utah's offense. Yeah, the less said about where they rank in the country currently. Right now, the better second worst offense in the Big 12 overall, only behind Houston. Speaking of Houston, the Cougars, what a win. What a performance this team has had. And look, Utah lost to Houston. And I was talking about it last week. Utah lost to Houston. I can't believe that's a sentence that I'm saying as a Utah fan. But I'm not the only one saying that sentence anymore, nor was I. TCU also said it earlier. But Kansas State, a top 15 team, one that we just talked about. And Kansas State is still a really good team, right? They've wins against the likes of Colorado. They found ways to win a lot of games too. But Houston has now won back-to-back games against the teams in the Big 12, Utah and Kansas State, that were projected to finish 1 and 2. How did we get here? That, or just the point that happened. But I do want to talk about what that win for Houston means for Utah. Are the Utes as bad as we think they are? That's what I want to discuss in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Speaking of the NFL, we got Monday Night Football coming up this evening. The Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers face off. Baker Mayfield still doesn't have his top 2 weapons with him. The Chiefs continuing to roll. DeAndre Hopkins is in the mix now. However you're leaning in that game, you can head over to FanDuel. What else do we got? NHL action, we got NBA action, and college football, including Utah versus BYU, all of which will get underway this week. Utah BYU Saturday, but we got a lot of other sports action you can head over and look at. And don't forget to check out FanDuel for all your sports betting needs today. All right, Alex, coming in to close this one out. Houston won back-to-back games against Utah last week and against Kansas State. I can't believe it. And what does this prove to us? Well, number one, that loss to Houston is not as bad as we thought it was. Houston has had some rough moments. I do not think that Houston is all of a sudden one of the, best teams in the Big 12. They're still one of the probably bottom 5 teams in the conference. But this fact remains. Houston is not like an embarrassingly bad football team like they were last year. And I do think the fact that they were also able to beat Kansas State, this is a different football team with Zion Chris in back-to-back weeks. This Houston defense ranked top 20. They've played some really good football, and it shows you yet again, they hold an offense like Kansas State to just 19 points. Utah's played a lot of really good defenses, actually. TCU's secondary, even though TCU's overall defense wasn't great, their secondary is actually pretty good. Arizona State, who do we just talked about? Houston. And then even there was one other team I feel like I'm forgetting in that stretch. But either way, Utah over the course of those 3 games, they've played all decent Big 12 defenses. BYU's top 50 defense, but they aren't ranked, like I said, in the top 20. So there is hope if you're Utah. You look at it, hey, a lot of these teams that have slowed Utah down are actually pretty solid. They're kind of all over the board, like can beat anyone and lose to anyone. This Utah team is incredibly disappointing, but I think it's also important to keep in mind, one of the reasons they've struggled is they played some decent defenses. They're playing one against BYU, but I do think there's a lot of things you can take from Utah as you start to look at how the other teams have performed against them and say, hey, I'm not ready to completely give up on this Utah team and say they're one of the worst Power 4 football teams when you got Houston beating one of the best Power 4 football teams in Kansas State. This should give Utah fans hope of like, okay, it's not all bad Utah. It's also like, hey, Houston has had a second half resurgence, and Utah could have their own form of second half resurgence that at least results in a bowl game berth.
Absolutely. It's not over until it's over. Anything can happen from here until that final week of college football. It's not over until it's over. And I think, give credit to Houston. I don't think anybody saw that win against Kansas State coming. I certainly did not. JT, I'm sure you didn't either. But I think that's more of a testament to how unpredictable this Big 12 conference is going to be, more than it is a testament to maybe a second half resurgence to Houston. Obviously, time will tell. But I do still think that this conference is just so unpredictable, right? If you would have told me after the magical special season that Arizona had last season that they would come into Big 12 conference play and go winless in October, I wouldn't have believed it, right? This is a good Arizona football team, and they haven't been able to do it in the Big 12 yet.
They haven't, and yeah, Arizona's been really struggling, and unfortunately they still beat Utah too. So it's been a year for Utah, but that doesn't mean that's how the rest of the season is going to go. I cannot wait to see what this Utah team has in store for BYU on Saturday night. Utah versus BYU. The rivalry is renewed. We'll be covering it all week long on Locked On Utes. But Alex, I know you'll be busy as well, my friends. If people want more Utah BYU talk, where should they head over to?
Absolutely. So my personal pages can be found right there on the @Napoles Alex down there at the bottom. However, there is a lot going on this week at KSL. We have a lot of fun, amazing things planned for Rivalry Week on the Zone, on KSL Sports, everywhere, and anything KSL Sports. We got a lot of fun activities that we think you guys will enjoy. We think you guys will like over the course of the next Rivalry Week. And so head over to KSL Sports and you can check out all that content there.
Alex, thank you for stopping by, my friend. Always great having you on.
Thanks for the invite, man. Always a good time to come on here and talk some Utah football.
And we get to talk a lot about Utah and BYU all week long. So we hope you'll join us here on Locked On Utes. We'll be reacting to Kyle Whittingham, as well as all of the players' comments that come out from Monday's media availability on tomorrow's show. Hope you have an amazing Monday. We are just a few days away from Utah and BYU being back, and we hope you'll return to join us as we continue to break down this exciting matchup on tomorrow's Locked On Utes.